and welcome to this episode of the Northwood Podcast. I'm your host, Heath Jones. Apologies in advance for any background noise you may hear. There are children outside playing and people working in their yards, so there's a lot of clatter outside of our church today. But I think it won't distract us too much, which is a good thing because today we're going over one of Jesus' most memorable parables. It's the one from which we get the word talent, as in you are a talented individual. You know, skills, abilities. But the application of this story is far more broad than that, no surprise, as is usually the case with Jesus' teachings, and we'll get into that in a moment. But first, some housekeeping. We should let you know that this podcast is a ministry of Northwood Christian Church. It's my church that I pastor. We're a church in Indianapolis, Indiana. You should look us up, Google our name, along with our city, and you should find us, no problem. We're a church that wants to see our world transformed so that every human being can live well. We believe that that is what the realm of God brings, that Jesus wanted to bring into our real-time presence. So we feel that Jesus calls us to this work. And if you'd like to learn more about this, please reach out to me directly. It would be my preference. I'd love to hear from you. My email is Heath, Heath, at indyncc.org. That's ndncc.org. And I'd love to hear from you directly. Or maybe check out our website. It does need updated, but also it has some good and relevant info about us that is up to date. Simply type in www.ndncc.org. That's indyncc.org. You should also know that this podcast is produced and distributed by the All Indiana Podcast Network. The All Indiana Podcast Network produces and distributes podcasts made by Hoosiers. That's our quirky word for people from Indiana. Made by Hoosiers, and often about topics relevant to people who live here in Indiana, although not exclusively. So if you live out of state, you should still check them out. You can peruse all of their offerings by visiting wishtv.com/podcasts. That's wishtv.com/podcasts. And moving on. Here in a moment, we'll be going over the parable that I mentioned before. But first, we need to take a pause for some ads for our podcast audience. If you listened before, you know what's in store. If this means you, we'll find you after the break. And we're back. Or if you're watching on YouTube, you never left. Either way, as I was saying, we're going over a parable which Jesus told, and you can find it for yourself in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, verses 14 through 30. That's Matthew 25, 14 through 30. And without further delay, it reads, "The kingdom of heaven is like a man who was leaving on a trip. He called his servants and handed his possessions over to them. To one, he gave 5 valuable coins, or traditionally talents. And to another, he gave 2. And to another, he gave 1. He gave to each servant according to that servant's ability. Then he left on his journey. After the man left, the servant who had 5 valuable coins took them and went to work doing business with them. He gained 5 more. In the same way, the one who had 2 valuable coins or talents gained 2 more. But the servant who had received the 1 talent dug a hole in the ground and buried his master's money. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The one who had received 5 valuable coins came forward with 5 additional coins. He said, 'Master, you gave me 5 valuable coins. Look, I've gained 5 more.' His master replied, 'Excellent. You are a good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I'll put you in charge of much. Come, celebrate with me.' The second servant also came forward and said, 'Master, you gave me 2 valuable coins. Look, I've gained 2 more.' His master replied, 'Well done. You are a good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I'll put you in charge of much. Come, celebrate with me.' Now the one who had received 1 valuable coin came and said, Master, I knew that you are a hard man. You harvest grain where you haven't sown. You gather crops where you haven't spread seed. So I was afraid, and I hid my talent in the ground. Here, you have what's yours. His master replied, You evil and lazy servant. You knew that I harvest grain where I haven't sown, and that I have gathered crops where I haven't spread seed. In that case, you should have turned my money over to the bankers, so that when I returned, you could give me what belonged to me with interest. Therefore, take from him the valuable coin, and give it to the one who has 10 coins. Those who have much will receive more, and they will have more than they need. But as for those who don't have much, even the little bit they have will be taken away from them. Now, take the worthless servant and throw him out into the farthest darkness. People there will be weeping and grinding their teeth. That last little bit is fairly bleak, but if you think about it, it really does describe the effects of greed on the planet Earth into the human race. But I digress. First, I want to tell you something from one of my favorite stories, from the final book of C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. There is a tragic scene there. The tragedy plays out in the very place where all should be well. The heroes of the story and some of the anti-heroes find themselves in heaven. And they've been surrounded now by beauty and life and light, and Aslan, who is the Christ figure. And so one could say that they have finally now had their eyes opened to a richer and deeper reality than they have known before. Now, Lewis is writing allegorically, and here he is writing of how Christians should become appreciative of the realm of God, opening up around them, opening up around us as we walk with Jesus as his disciple, and sometimes we miss it. More on that in a bit. Back to the story. Just off to the side are some dwarfs. Up until this point, they have been treacherous and self-seeking and have caused all sorts of problems. And now they find themselves surrounded by radiance. But you wouldn't know it. For some reason, they are unable to enter into this joy. They still think that they are in an old, dingy shed, which is where they had been just previously, filled with animal waste and straw, when in fact they are sitting in the outskirts of heaven. But their perception is flawed. They cannot see it. I'll just read for you the passage that I'm thinking of, and we do well to think of this and remember that this is a parable about the human race. So with that in mind, let's read. This is from The Last Battle, towards the end, C.S. Lewis's book. And I quote, Aslan raised his head and shook his mane. Instantly a glorious feast appeared on the dwarf's knees, pies and tongues and pigeons and trifles and ices, and each dwarf had a goblet of good wine in his right hand. But it wasn't much use. They began eating and drinking greedily enough, but it was clear that they couldn't taste it properly. They thought they were eating and drinking only the sort of things you might find in a stable. One said he was trying to eat hay, and another said that he had got a bit of old turnip, and a third said he'd found a raw cabbage leaf. And they raised golden goblets of rich red wine to their lips and said, Ugh, fancy drinking dirty water out of a trough that a donkey's been at. Never thought we'd come to this. But very soon every dwarf began suspecting that every other dwarf had found something nicer than he had, and they started grabbing and snatching and went on to quarreling, till in a few minutes there was a free fight, and all the good food was smeared on their faces and clothes or trodden underfoot. But when at last they sat down to nurse their black eyes and their bleeding noses, they all said, Well, at any rate, there's no humbug here. We haven't let anyone take us in. The dwarfs are for the dwarfs. You see, said Aslan, they will not let us help them. They have chosen cunning instead of belief. Their prison is only in their own minds, yet they are in that prison. And so, afraid of being taken in, they cannot be taken out. End quote. By taken out, he means taken out of their false reality and into the true one. The true one is that they are surrounded by an abundance of goodness. The tragedy is found in that joy is right there, but the blind cannot see it. And so we act out accordingly, believing that we are defending our scarce supply of blessing, when in fact we're squandering it. Likewise, our parable today is about a servant who, though possessing great wealth, and one talent back then was great wealth, that one cannot see the situation for what it is, and so he wastes it. Back to that story. An owner leaves his farm, leaving the workers to mind his property. I frame it that way so that we can upfront deal with one of the more troubling aspects of the story that I feel must be touched upon in stories like this. The fact that the world that first received this parable assumed slavery as the status quo. That is the awkward fact. And in other translations, these characters are translated as master and slave. And this metaphor did translate far easier 2,000 years ago, when various peoples and cultures and groups did not envision yet a time when slavery would not be an acceptable practice, generally speaking. But today, thankfully, we've progressed a bit. And so we'll have to tweak the language a bit so that the heart of the story can still break through without the language serving as an obstacle. And so we'll keep master, as problematic as that can be, but we'll slide from slave to servant. And that was reflected in the reading I selected for today. But if you've heard older versions, I just want everyone to be aware of that dynamic, and it's being thought through. Anyway, the master apportions his talents out to the three servants, each according to their ability. Now you, I'm sure, are familiar with this word talent. I, at the very beginning, alluded to it, this English word that we use to describe our gifts, our skills and abilities, our aptitudes and strengths. In the world of this parable, though, a talent was an obscene amount of money. So for a common laborer, it is estimated that it equaled 15 years' wages, just one of these. So consider this. The one who was given 5 was given more than he could likely spend in a lifetime. And the one who was given 2 was given 30 years of pay. And the one who received 1 wasn't doing half bad himself. To put that into context, we're talking about an abundance of blessing no matter who you are here. Now, you've heard this story. The first 2 servants double what their master gave, but the third buries it. And when the master comes back, we find it's because the servant is afraid and believes that he lives under the aegis of a harsh master. The text reads, "Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours." Now here's the thing. Up until this point, nothing indicates that the personality of the master aligns with this third servant's impressions, this harshness. As a matter of fact, up until this point, the master has been unbelievably generous, for he has divvied up several lifetimes worth of wages and given it to his servants. And what's more, it seems like the third servant completely misunderstands the meaning of the master sowing where he does, or reaping where he does not sow. In other words, this master is able to call life out of the ground with very little effort. In other words, this third servant should have less to fear, because here is a master who will always be able to cultivate life around him. And the first 2 servants do with their talents what they have seen their master do, this very thing. Remember, sows where he does not plant. This assumes a world in which there is an abundance of resources. Just, you got to know where to search and where to glean. Translation: God knows that our world is filled with an abundance of resources, enough for all of the human race. In this parable, the master knows this. The first 2 servants know this. And the first 2 servants enter into the joy of the master because they have understood what the master knows. That the good things they have been given are meant to be multiplied and shared. That's the main point here. And there is joy in this. That is the gift that comes in the giving. There is joy in using what we've been blessed by to bless others. I don't know if you've experienced it, but it's true. There is joy in the vision of John Wesley, who once did say that we should earn all we can so we can save all we can and then give all we can. And the same can be said of every asset that we bring to the table. We should hone and develop each and every skill, or as the word has come to me now, talent. Chase down every passion and multiply the blessings we have received from God to share with others. Then we can enter into the joy that God knows, because God has been giving in this way since the very beginning. But this third servant, the story focuses on the third servant midway and becomes all about him. And the sobering wisdom is learned at his expense in this story. He says, I knew you were a harsh master. Could it be that his worldview is one in which 15 years' wages is not abundance, but scarcity? It's a strange perspective, but I've seen it today. It seems to me that he thinks that if he puts his talent to use, he may be taking on a greater risk. And he is. After all, he could lose it all. And here is the point of the dwarfs in Lewis's story. The place they inhabit is filled with abundance, but all they can see is the inside of a dingy, dank room. Joy is literally right under their nose for them to experience, but they do not have the eyes to see it. Their reality seems bleak and scarce, so they are unwilling to open themselves up to the good things that surround them. Or, to bring it back to the parable, how if God were a hard master? How if the third servant were right? And we all should be circling our wagons and clinging to what we've got, fighting over it like those dwarves in the shed. If we are to view the world as a place that inevitably leads to scarcity and fear, then we must believe that the Creator is a hard master, someone who set up the universe with impossible expectations and certain misery. This alternative is bleak. And it is not the alternative this parable wants to lead us to. This third servant finds himself in the outer darkness where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. And as I said earlier, I've seen it before. I've seen it happen to the characters in the story that we just read, but also in other stories like in the life of Ebenezer Scrooge, classic example. As a matter of fact, I am witnessing it happen in the lives of some of my friends, people that I know. People who cling to what they have, bury it, and hoard it for an assumed rainy day that may or may not ever come. Stressing about possessions, they are dominated by their insecurities. And they are terrified of rejection. This is a form of hell that we see in the world that greed leads to. Individually in the heart of the greedy, and then in its effects on the world. Weeping and gnashing of teeth, and then some. Translate that as sleepless nights, or the cruelty that often accompanies greed. But what has this to do with you? Well, I'm a pastor. We're at church, or maybe you're not, but many of us are. And church is a place where we ought to do with the property and assets we've been given what we have been called to do. This should always be on our mind. Talks about resources in church often will turn into tense and even heated discussions because we think that we are serving a harsh master who, after all, called all of this into existence from seemingly thin air. So when thinking hard about what to do with our talents in church, we tend to be cautious and safe. What if the roof springs a leak? What if the money dries up? What then? And if we let go of any of this, we think the fear is we may lose it all. We'll have no church then. And even if we lose half of it, we no longer know who we are. What if it never turns around? So we sit in a church building on some Sundays that begins to look like a tomb with no expectancy of Easter. Church, do we expect Easter? Does Northwood Christian Church expect Easter? Do you listening to the Northwood podcast expect rebirth? Well, here is what the third servant must learn. His joy in salvation could have been found if he had yielded what he was given and had risked something. Do you remember the story of the boy and his small lunch, 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and the feeding of the 5,000? It's that. You don't have much, but here's what you do have, and then you find through it all that even though you have little to offer, you have more than you thought. And that way leads to joy. So even if the lights go out, metaphorically or literally, or the music stops, even if we lose whatever, to fire or windstorm, even if we find ourselves standing as a church in a parking lot with our hands in empty pockets, with nothing else, we still have an abundance of gifts that our God has blessed us with. Even if we have nothing, we have you, and you are enough. And yes, I mean you. Insert your name. God has put us here together with an abundance of riches, and you are a part of this. You are more than a talent. You are boundless creativity, passion, with a great capacity to love. Don't squander it. There is one more thing I want you to know. I want you to know that the English word talent does come from this story. I wanted to know from the beginning if this word that we use to mean talent, like skills and abilities, that in the story means a large sum of money. I wanted to know if we got this word from this story. And what I found is that we have. Somewhere around the 13th century, interpreters of this parable came to stretch its meaning to include our skills, abilities, and innate, talents. Which brings us, I think, closer to the heart of this parable's meaning, which I do believe is calling us not to only use our money and possessions to advance the realm of God, because some don't even have that. It leaves a lot of people out if that's all it means. No, I think it also means that we share our skills, creativity, and all else that we have to offer. And that includes everybody. So what gives? Well, we multiply it. Lean hard into our gifts and passions. Take risks, take chances, catch a glimpse of God's realm and chase it down. Either way, rest assured, for so long as you are alive and you are with us, we as a community are filthy, stinking rich because of what you bring. So long as we have you, we have enough talents to go around. So give yourself, multiply, 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 create, create, create. Do not bury what you have or hide. Rather, hand it over to be put to good use. The question is, are we brave enough to enter into the joy of God? This has been the Northwood Podcast. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe to the podcast by way of whatever app you use to listen, or leave a comment. These points of engagement drive more traffic our way. Or check out our website, www.indyncc.org. And also check out the other podcasts produced by the All Indiana Podcast Network. Until next time, this has been the Northwood Podcast. I am Heath Jones. Peace.